faint hum of the eviction notice tearing through the air echoed in Rashawn's mind long after the sheriff had left. He stared at the front door, his wife, Ava, clutching their daughter's hand as tears fell down her face. The officer's voice had been like cold metal. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. No negotiation, no humanity, just a flat, unwavering tone of authority. How is this happening? Ava whispered, her voice cracked with disbelief. Rashawn didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight. A fist of rage clenched around his heart. The house, the home they had fought for, built memories in, was being ripped from him for a single late payment, one the bank had conveniently forgotten to notify them about. Rashawn had worked every single hour at the warehouse, and Ava had taken on double shifts at the nursing home, but none of it had mattered. As he stepped back into their living room, his eyes landed on the picture of their baby girl. Smiling with bright eyes on her first birthday, they had dreamed of a better life, a future away from the stifling grip of generational poverty. But now, it all felt like a cruel joke. Rashawn glanced out the window at the gleaming mansion across the street, the house that belonged to the Whitakers, the ones who had constantly turned their noses up at him, and Ava, who called them good folks to their face but avoided them in every way possible. One phone call, one devastating, final blow. Dad, what's going to happen to us? The question hit him like a truck, and for the first time, he didn't have an answer. Rashawn's hands trembled as he held the notice. His eyes scanned the harsh, blocky letters, but his brain refused to process the words. Eviction notice. It seemed like some twisted joke, one that had no punchline, no way out. His pulse hammered in his ears as Ava sat beside him on the couch, the baby girl asleep in her arms. She had been napping peacefully before the knock at the door, before everything had gone wrong. Now, she clutched the baby closer, her face pale with shock. Rashawn, what's happening? Her voice cracked like dry wood, and the tightness in her throat betrayed her attempt to hold it together. They can't do this, Rashawn muttered, pacing across the room. He couldn't even look at her, couldn't bear to see the hopelessness that mirrored his own. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating him. His mind raced, replaying the moments leading up to this. The late payment, one late payment. The banks never once reached out to them, never warned them. The system had allowed this to happen, and now they had no place to go. The house, their home, was being ripped out from under them like a rug in front of a child. He couldn't look at the eviction notice any longer. It felt like it was burning his fingers. But it didn't matter. The sheriff had said it all. He'd given them 24 hours. Nothing more. Ava, his voice broke. We don't have anywhere to go. Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her lips trembling. What about your brother? Rashawn shook his head, jaw clenched. They won't take us in, not like this. His brother's apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone the three of them. He knew it. Ava knew it. Suddenly, he froze, staring out the window. Across the street, the Whitakers' mansion stood tall and proud, its immaculate yard casting an impossible shadow. Rashawn couldn't help but feel bitter anger burn through him. The Whitakers, those wealthy, condescending people, had never once shown any kind of kindness to him or his family. And yet here they were, living the life that he and Ava had dreamed of while they were tossed out into the street. Ava's voice was barely a whisper, but the words cut deep. What are we going to do, Rashawn? His chest tightened, but he swallowed hard, tried to find the courage that had always been there before. He turned, meeting her eyes. I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up. Not now. As he said it, though, doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. The world felt too big, too unfair, and he had no idea where to even begin. Rashawn stood at the door of yet another apartment complex, the air thick with tension as he stared at the buzzer. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, steady and quick, but it wasn't the excitement of a new possibility. It was the anxiety of yet another rejection. Ava stood behind him, arms folded tightly over her chest, a slight tremble in her hands that she couldn't hide. He turned to look at her, and for a brief moment, they both shared the same silent question. Will we ever catch a break? The buzzer sounded, followed by the click of the door opening. A man in his late 40s, wearing a wrinkled button-up shirt, peered out at them, eyes flickering over them before settling with cold indifference. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat and polite, too polite, like a practice mask. "We're looking for a place to rent," Rashawn said, holding up the paperwork and smiling as best as he could. "We got good references, steady jobs." The man's eyes drifted down to the paper and back to Rashawn's face, his gaze lingering for just a fraction too long, then scanning over Ava and their daughter, who clung to Ava's side, her little hand wrapped around her mother's fingers. "We don't have anything available at the moment," the man said, almost too quickly, cutting Rashawn off mid-sentence. His gaze shifted behind them toward the street, and Rashawn could swear he glanced at the well-kept cars parked down the road, their engines still warm from the brief errands of wealthy tenants. The neighborhood itself spoke volumes. Expensive cars parked outside with manicured lawns. Everything they could never afford. "Do you have anything coming up soon?" Rashawn asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. The man hesitated. "Sorry, you can check back in a month or two. But, like I said, nothing right now." Rashawn and Ava exchanged a quick, helpless look. The man gave a perfunctory nod and began to close the door. "Wait, please," Ava interjected, her voice shaking. "I can explain." But the door was already closing. It didn't even close slowly. It snapped shut with finality. Rashawn's throat felt dry, a bitter taste of defeat rising in the back of his mouth. He turned away, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. Ava trailed behind him, her step slower than usual, as if weighed down by something invisible. Outside, the sun beat down relentlessly, but inside, there was only the suffocating silence of rejection. The world felt like it had turned its back on them, a cold and indifferent machine grinding them down under its weight. As they walked toward their car, Rashawn muttered under his breath, "This is happening everywhere, isn't it? It's not just us." Ava didn't answer immediately. She fumbled for the car keys, her hands trembling, and finally spoke. "I don't know anymore. We keep trying, and it just feels like we're invisible. They don't see us." "Not really." Rashawn slammed the car door shut as he climbed in. He wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers. He wanted to shout out that they were just as good as anyone else, that they worked harder than anyone, but they were met with silence. The neighborhood that had rejected them just minutes ago was just one example of a systemic issue they could never escape. He had tried to teach his daughter about fairness, about the importance of hard work, but what were they supposed to do when the world wasn't playing by the same rules? Ava finally broke the silence. "What now?" Rashawn let out a breath, staring at the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything pressing against him. "We keep looking," he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it used to have. As he drove, the streets blurred by, and Rashawn couldn't shake the thought that they were trapped in a loop of rejection and inequality, a loop that didn't seem to have an end. His thoughts shifted back to the Whitakers' mansion, the one across from their old house. Their lives, so far removed from his and Ava's, now taunted him. He knew they had their problems too, but the difference was that the Whitakers never had to fight for anything. Rashawn's chest tightened. How could they be so lucky? And how could his family keep getting slammed down by a system they didn't even understand? "What about the Whitakers?" Ava asked quietly, staring out the window. Rashawn's hands tightened on the wheel. "What about them?" he replied, his voice tight. "I don't know. Maybe they know something we don't. They're always offering to help, always offering to lend a hand. Maybe we should at least talk to them." His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You want me to go ask them for help?" His voice dripped with disbelief. "After everything they've done? After all the times they made us feel like we're less than—" Ava hesitated but pressed on. "Maybe they're not all bad." Rashawn snorted bitterly. "I don't know what to believe anymore." He pressed his foot harder on the gas, the road unfolding in front of him like a never-ending stretch of empty possibilities. But deep down, he knew Ava was right about one thing. They were running out of options. The phone call came out of nowhere, slicing to the fog of their worry like a flash of unexpected light. Rashawn had barely finished hanging up from yet another fruitless call with a landlord when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something told him to pick it up. "Hello, Mr. Rashawn Davis?" The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, almost too calm, the kind of voice people use when they were trying to sound official, important. I'm calling regarding a property in your area. Rashawn's brow furrowed. Yeah, this is Rashawn. I have a potential offer for you, a home opportunity. The voice paused, a slight rustle of papers on the other end. It's a bit unusual, but I believe it could be exactly what you and your family are looking for. Rashawn exchanged a glance with Ava, who was seated beside him on the couch, her face etched with exhaustion. She had been trying to stay hopeful, but the constant rejection was taking its toll. She raised an eyebrow. What kind of home? Rashawn asked warily. $1 million home, the voice replied, and I believe you'd be an excellent fit for place. Rashawn's mouth went dry. Wait, what? $1 million home. He glanced at Ava, who stared at him, wide-eyed. Are you serious? I assure you, Mr. Davis, this is a legitimate offer. You can't find a better deal than this. The voice was smooth, unwavering. All the details will be handled. I just need to know if you're interested. Rashawn glanced at Ava again, his mind racing. It felt like a dream, a cruel joke. They were struggling to stay afloat, on the verge of being homeless, and now someone was offering them a mansion. Something didn't add up. Why would someone offer us a house like that? Rashawn asked, his voice low with suspicion. Let's just say we've had a change in circumstances, and we believe the property could be of better use to you than to us. It was one of those offers that didn't make sense. Rashawn was no fool. $1 million home? For them, it felt like a setup, a trap, but at the same time, what choice did they have? All right, where's the property? Rashawn said, already regretting the decision, but feeling the heavy weight of the alternatives pressed down on him. Just outside of town. I'll send the details over shortly. Trust me, Mr. Davis. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The voice clicked off an abrupt finality. He sat there for a moment, the phone still pressed his ear. The room was silent, the air thick with disbelief. I don't know about this, Rashawn. Ava's voice broke through his thoughts, her hand on his arm. It sounds too good to be true. Rashawn could feel the tension rising in his chest. But the possibility of having a place for their daughter, a safe place, was something they had dreamed of for so long. He couldn't just ignore it. I don't know either, he admitted, turning the phone over in his hands. But what else do we have left? Another rejection? Another door slammed in our faces. Ava nodded, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. I just don't want us to get hurt, Rashawn. What if it's a trap? I don't know, but we'll check it out. We've got nothing to lose. Ava fell silent, and for a moment, Rashawn thought she might argue further. But instead, she simply gave a soft sigh, her fingers running through her daughter's curls. I trust you, she said quietly, but we have to be careful. This could be something we don't want to walk into. Rashawn's mind raced as he stared at the phone in his hand. They had no backup plan, no place to go except the unknown. The thought of taking the risk gnawed at him, but the weight of their situation forced his hand. That evening, the details arrived, an email with an address, a description, and even the legal documents to sign. Rashawn opened the email slowly, trying to digest what he was reading. The pictures attached showed a stunning mansion, large windows reflecting the deep orange of the setting sun, a pristine lawn that seemed to stretch for miles. It was everything he had dreamed of but never thought he'd actually see up close. What do you think? Ava asked, standing behind him, her arms crossed over her chest. Rashawn scrolled through the pictures. The house was bigger than he could have imagined. The neighborhood, too, quiet, suburban, pristine. Too perfect. There was no reason why someone would want to get rid of such a place. Not unless they had something to hide. I don't know. He clicked on the legal document. It was a straight transfer, no strings attached, other than a few conditions that seemed normal enough. Responsible upkeep, minor repairs. It all felt so simple. Too simple. It's perfect, Ava said softly, but something about it doesn't sit right with me. I know, Rashawn muttered, rubbing his temple. I'm not sure what's going on, but I don't think we have much choice. We'll go tomorrow, take a look, see if it's for real. Ava nodded, but her gaze lingered on him, as if she were searching for something more in his expression. He couldn't offer her an answer, not one that would give her peace. They were stuck. The next morning, they drove to the mansion. The road that led up to it was long and lined with towering trees, their branches arching overhead like a tunnel. When they arrived, the house stood before them, massive and imposing. It wasn't just a home. It was a symbol of wealth, power, and everything they had been excluded from. The front door opened before they could even knock. A man in a suit greeted them with a polite smile, a kind of distant warmth that immediately put Rashawn on edge. "Mr. Davis, welcome," the man said, shaking Rashawn's hand. "Please come in. We're so glad you could make it." They stepped inside, and Ava's eyes widened. The interior was just as grand as the outside. Polished marble floors, chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, ornate furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was beautiful, but all Rashawn could feel was a coldness in the air, like it didn't belong to them, like they didn't belong here. "This is all for us?" Rashawn asked, his voice tight. The man smiled. "Yes, of course. It's yours if you like it." The words hung in the air, too good to be true. But Rashawn couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into something they didn't fully understand. The following days after their first visit to the mansion felt like a blur. Too surreal, too jarring to fully process. Rashawn and Ava kept returning to the house, walking through its grand hallways, exploring the rooms, and touching the ornate furniture as though it would vanish if they weren't careful. They had done the same thing over and over, walking through the spaces, allowing themselves to dream for a moment, but then quickly dismissing it as fantasy. But the truth was undeniable. The house was theirs, or at least, it seemed that way. Rashawn had tried to shake the feeling, but every time he walked into that giant, empty living room, the weight of it all sank deeper into his chest. It wasn't just the size of the house or the beauty of the polished floors and marble countertops. It was a feeling that this place was far too perfect to be a gift with no strings attached. "We should take a break from all this, just for a little bit," Ava said one evening as they sat in the living room. She had been quiet for most of the day, her eyes flicking nervously from the window to the walls, as though she could see something hidden in the shadows. "I know, babe," Rashawn replied, glancing up from the papers they'd been sorting. "But what else are we supposed to do? We have a place with baby. For us." "I get it, but something doesn't feel right," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's like we're being watched, you know? Like everyone's watching us." He leaned forward, reaching for her hand. "What do you mean? Who's watching us?" "I don't know. I just feel like I'm not supposed to be here. Like we're intruding on something we don't understand." She looked away, frowning. "Maybe it's all too much for me to process." "I get it. I do. But we've got to take the chance. We don't have any other options." She stared at the massive windows that overlooked the backyard, her eyes unfocused. "I don't think I've ever felt so out of place in my life." Rashawn sighed, rubbing his face. He wasn't blind to the tension in the air. He felt it too, the unease, the questions that lingered unanswered. Every time they stepped foot in the mansion, it was as though the walls were pressing in on them, closing them off from the world. But what choice did they have? It was a beautiful place, and if they could keep it, they could start over. They could escape the cycle they had been stuck in for years. The next day, they went back to meet with the man who had offered them the house, a man named Mr. Burke. He was well-dressed, with sharp features and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, and once again, his voice had the same calculated smoothness, as though he'd been rehearsing this moment for years. "Mr. Davis, Mrs. Davis, I'm so glad to see you again." Burke greeted them as they stepped through the door. He ushered them inside with a wave, his smile unyielding. "How are you feeling? Settling in?" Rashawn didn't respond immediately. Instead, his gaze flicked to the large portrait hanging above the fireplace, a portrait of the Whitakers, the family that had lived here before them. The picture seemed to mock him, with their perfect smiles and pristine white clothing, their lives so far removed from his own. "We're adjusting," Rashawn finally said. "But, Mr. Burke, I can't help but wonder why this place was offered to us. We don't know you. We've never met you or your family. So why us? Why now?" Burke's smile never wavered, but the light in his eyes dimmed just for a moment. An imperceptible shift that left Rashawn feeling like he was dealing with someone who wasn't as friendly as he appeared. "Well, Mr. Davis," Burke began, his tone smooth as he took a step closer, "sometimes life hands you opportunities that you simply cannot ignore. The Whitakers, they're no longer in need of this house. They've moved on to other things, and we thought you and your family might find it more suitable for your needs." "But it's $1 million home," Ava interjected, her voice hesitant but filled with disbelief. "It's too much for us. We don't even have the money for a place like this." Burke chuckled softly. "Mrs. Davis, you don't need to worry about money. This home is a gift, no strings attached. It's simply an opportunity. You've worked hard, and you deserve something better. This is a chance for a fresh start." The words sounded so rehearsed, so perfect, but Rashawn could see through them. He knew they were being sold something they didn't fully understand. The price of the so-called gift wasn't monetary. It was something else, something darker. "And the Whitakers," Rashawn said, his voice low and measured, "why would they just give it up? A house like this?" Burke's smile faltered just slightly before he recovered. "The Whitakers have their reasons. As I said, they felt it was time to let go. New chapters, new beginnings." Ava and Rashawn exchanged a glance, both of them sensing something wasn't right. But neither of them had enough to stand on. Rashawn felt trapped, like they were already in too deep, already tangled in something that had its claws in them, something that wouldn't let go. Burke led them through the house again, giving them a tour of every room. He pointed out the high-end appliances, the custom-built furniture, the expansive backyard that seemed to go on forever. The house was undeniably beautiful, and for a moment almost felt like a dream. But Rashawn couldn't shake the growing suspicion in his gut. There were too many signs, too many unanswered questions. Burke's friendly demeanor felt like a thin veil over something sinister. The way he looked at them, like they were a project, like they were just another thing to be managed, controlled. After their tour, as they stood in the grand entryway, Rashawn turned to Burke. "I appreciate your generosity," he said, his voice sharp with unspoken questions. "But I need to know more. This doesn't feel right. What's the catch?" Burke's smile returned wide in practice, but the darkness behind his eyes was now unmistakable. "There's no catch, Mr. Davis. It's simply a gift." But Rashawn could see it, could feel it in the air around him. There was something more behind this offer, and as much as he wanted to take it, to run with it, he couldn't. Something was wrong, and he couldn't ignore it. The mansion might be theirs, but the cost of living there would be far more than they were prepared for. The following days passed in a strange haze, filled with unease and questions that couldn't quite be answered. Despite their suspicions, Rashawn and Ava continued to live in the mansion. The place felt like a trap, but the alternative, being out on the streets, was far worse. They tried to bury their doubts, but they lingered, poisoning every moment of quiet. At night, Ava couldn't sleep. The house, vast and empty, felt like it was closing in on her, each creak of the floorboards like a warning. She often woke to see Rashawn pacing in the living room, his brow furrowed in thought, as if he was wrestling with a puzzle that wouldn't fit together. "I don't like it, Rashawn," she said one night, her voice low, almost whispering into the heavy silence of the mansion. "This place, something's not right about it." Rashawn sat next to her on the couch, his fingers drumming anxiously on his knee. "I know, babe, but what can we do? The house is ours now. It's too late to turn back." "But why give it to us?" Ava asked. "They don't know us. The Whitakers, they never cared about us before. And now this." Rashawn paused. The weight of her words settled heavily on him. "I've been thinking the same thing. I don't trust it, not for a second. But," he shook his head, struggled with the words, "but we don't have any other choice." Ava's gaze flickered to the large windows overlooking the darkened backyard. The streetlights in the distance looked like small dots of light, nothing more. She couldn't escape the feeling that something was lurking just beyond their view. "I can't shake the feeling that we're being watched," Ava continued, her voice thick with worry. "Like someone's keeping track of everything we do." Rashawn rubbed his eyes, trying to ignore the growing tension in his chest. "I know. It feels like we're under a microscope." He paused, then spoke again more resolutely. "But I think it's time we figure out what's really going on. The next morning, Rashawn set out to do what he had been dreading. He would find out everything there was to know about the Whitakers and the mansion. It had been bothering him for days. The way Burke had acted so casual when talking about the house. The way he seemed to dodge the hard questions. Burke had claimed the Whitakers had moved on, but Rashawn wasn't buying it. There was more to the story, and he was going to find it. He started by researching the Whitaker family. As he scrolled through news articles, financial reports, and public records, he stumbled upon a few names. People who had been connected to the Whitakers in the past. Some of them were lawyers. Others were business associates. But all had been involved in property deals, shady transactions, and questionable investments. Rashawn's stomach turned as he dug deeper, the more he uncovered. The Whitakers were far from the respectable family they had once appeared to be. One article in particular caught his eye. Whitaker family and the alleged fraudulent land deals. A timeline of deception. He clicked on it, and as he read, a pit formed in his stomach. The Whitakers had been involved in multiple cases of fraudulent land deals, skimming money off the top of construction projects, and pushing out homeowners in gentrifying areas. The more Rashawn read, the more he realized that the Whitakers weren't just rich. They were powerful and ruthless. His hands shook as he scrolled through the list of properties they had bought, sold, and redistributed. The mansion they were living in had been purchased at a significantly lower price from a foreclosure auction, and the Whitakers had made millions off the sale. Rashawn felt bile rise in his throat. This house had been stolen, and now they were being used as pawns in a game they didn't understand. That afternoon, Rashawn confronted Burke. He had gathered enough information to know something wasn't right. It was time to push for answers. Burke greeted him with his usual smile, but this time it was forced, as if he had anticipated this moment. "Mr. Davis, I trust everything is going well with the house?" he asked, his voice smooth and almost too friendly. Rashawn didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed Burke the article about the Whitakers' fraudulent deals. "I've been doing some research," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I know what you're involved in. You can't hide it forever." Burke's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something dark, almost predatory. He took a slow step toward Rashawn, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Mr. Davis," Burke said, his tone now cold and threatening, "you've been misled. The Whitakers aren't involved in anything illegal. They simply wanted to make sure this property was in good hands." "Good hands?" Rashawn echoed, his voice rising. "You're lying, Burke. You and your family have been behind this. Everything you've done with these properties, with these people, it's all part of a bigger plan, isn't it?" Burke's smile remained, but now it was more of a mask, something that concealed the anger simmering beneath. "I think you misunderstood the situation," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "But I'd suggest you be careful. This isn't a game, Mr. Davis. There are people who don't take kindly to misunderstandings." Rashawn didn't flinch. His fists clenched at his sides, his body brimming with anger. "I'm not afraid of you, Burke," he said, his voice sharp. "You're not going to get away with this." Burke's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold menace. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Rashawn stood his ground. For the first time since they had moved into the house, he felt like he was in control. He wasn't going to let Burke or the Whitakers use them any longer. "Watch your back, Mr. Davis," Burke warned, turning to leave, his tone still calm but laced with malice. "You don't want to cross us." As Burke walked away, Rashawn stood there, fists trembling, his blood boiling. He had found the truth, and now there was no turning back. He had to expose the Whitakers for who they really were, and he had to do it before they destroyed everything. The following week felt like a slow suffocation. Every day, Rashawn and Ava tried to keep up the charade that they were simply grateful for the home, but the stress of living in the mansion, coupled with a growing suspicion about the Whitakers, was beginning to take its toll. The house, which had once seemed like a miracle, now felt like a gilded cage. Every time Rashawn walked to the halls, the weight of the place pressed on him. The gleaming floors, the spotless rooms, all felt too perfect, too clean, as if someone had scrubbed away any trace of the people who had once lived there. There was no trace of the Whitakers' presence anymore, nothing that suggested they had ever cared for the house at all. It was as if they had moved in, lived in the mansion for years, and then casually tossed it aside as if it were nothing more than a forgotten toy. Ava had been right about the house, feeling like it was watching them. It was hard to shake the constant paranoia, the subtle fear that crept into every conversation. Their neighbors, for example. At first, they had been friendly, cordial even, but there was always an undercurrent of discomfort beneath their smiles. It was as though they were all in on a secret, one Rashawn and Ava hadn't been letting on yet. The neighbors were polite, but their eyes always lingered for just a moment too long when they passed by the mansion. The house, despite its beauty, felt empty. The vast rooms only seemed to amplify the silence. Rashawn was used to the constant noise of a family struggling to survive, the hustle and bustle of their old apartment, the sound of Ava's laughter and their daughter's tiny feet pattering around. But here, in this pristine palace, there was nothing but the echo of their footsteps. Rashawn's mind began to race again, thinking of all the lies they'd been fed, every answer they'd received from Burke, and the Whitakers felt rehearsed, too polished. The house had been a gift, they'd said, but a gift from whom, and at what cost? No one gave away $1 million mansion without some kind of reason, some kind of ulterior motive. One evening, after a long day of silence, Ava finally broke. She stood in the living room, hands on her hips, staring out the window at the manicured lawn. She'd been quieter than usual, her face drawn with exhaustion, her eyes distant. "I can't take any more, Rashawn," she said, her voice soft, but the hurt was clear. "I feel like I'm suffocating in here. It's not just the house. It's everything." Rashawn paused in the doorway, watching her. "What do you mean?" "I mean this place. It's wrong." "It feels wrong," Ava said, turning to face him, her eyes wide with emotion. "We're not welcome here. We never were. I thought this was a second chance, but now I just feel like we're being set up for something." Rashawn walked over to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "I feel it too, babe. I do. But we're stuck here. They've got us trapped. They gave us the house, and now they're watching everything we do." Ava let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared, Rashawn. What if they're planning something even worse than we think?" Rashawn didn't answer right away. His eyes flickered to the window again, his gaze hardening. Ava was right. Every day felt like they were walking closer and closer to the edge of a cliff, with no way of turning back. He had to find a way out for them. He couldn't let his family fall victim to whatever twisted game the Whitakers were playing. But just as Rashawn was about to respond, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the tension in the room, making them both jump. Rashawn picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest. It was an unknown number again, Burke's office, no doubt. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Davis, I trust you and your family are settling in well." Burke's voice purred from the other end. "I hope you're enjoying your new home. I wanted to check in and see if everything is to your liking." Rashawn's fingers tightened around the phone. He could hear the mock sweetness in Burke's voice, the kind of politeness that never quite reached the heart. "We're fine," Rashawn said, keeping his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "But there's something I don't understand, Burke. Why us? Why give us this place? We're not in the same league as you and your family." Burke chuckled lightly. "Oh, Mr. Davis, don't be so humble. You've worked hard for this. And sometimes a little bit of good fortune is what we all need. We're just helping you along the way." Rashawn didn't believe a word of it. His anger bubbled up, but he kept it in check. "I'm not buying it, Burke. I know what you're really up to, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." There was a brief silence on the other end, a pause that stretched on for too long, like Burke was carefully choosing his words. Then he spoke again, his voice darker this time. "Mr. Davis, I suggest you be careful about your accusations. You wouldn't want to find yourself in a situation you can't get out of." The line clicked dead before Rashawn could respond. The words hung in the air like a threat, suffocating the space around him. His grip on the phone tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Ava stepped closer to him. "What'd he say?" "They know," Rashawn said quietly, his voice low, filled with a growing dread. "They know we're on to them." "What now?" Ava asked, her voice small. Rashawn exhaled, his mind working furiously. "We can't stay here anymore. I don't care how nice the house is. I'll do whatever it takes to get us out of this. But Rashawn wasn't sure if escaping the mansion was even possible. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like a trap, a net that was slowly closing in around them. The world outside the mansion had already begun to feel more distant, like they had been cut off from everything they once knew. Their family, their friends, even the community that had once supported them. All of it felt like a lifetime ago. But as Rashawn stood in the darkened living room, staring out at the house that was now both a symbol of their brief fortune and their growing pee, the days that followed the phone call from Burke were filled with an anxious, ever-present tension. The mansion that had once felt like a dream now felt like an oppressive weight, pressing down on Rashawn and Ava. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with suspicion. Every glance from a neighbor felt like an unspoken judgment. The weight of it all was unbearable. They were trapped, with nowhere to turn. Rashawn knew he had to confront Burke, to force the truth out of him. He wasn't going to let this continue, not with his family's future on the line. Whatever game Burke was playing, Rashawn was going to make sure it came to an end. The morning after the threatening phone call, Rashawn didn't waste time. He put on his jacket, grabbed his keys, and headed out the door. Ava followed him, concern written all over her face. "You're really going to confront him, aren't you?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with worry. Rashawn stopped at the door, looking back at her. "We have to do this, Ava. We can't keep living like this. I'm not going to let them manipulate us anymore." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed the fear that gripped her. "Just be careful, okay? We don't know what they're capable of." "I know, but we don't have a choice anymore." The drive to Burke's office was quick, the streets blurring by as Rashawn's thoughts raced. He was done with the uncertainty. He was done with hiding. This whole situation had spiraled far beyond what they could handle. Whatever the Whitakers had planned, Rashawn wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not anymore. Burke's office was a sleek, modern building with polished windows that reflected the bright morning sky. It looked more like a corporate headquarters than a real estate firm, and that fact alone sent a chill through Rashawn. The place screamed wealth, wealth that had been built on lies and manipulation. When Rashawn stepped to the front door, the receptionist greeted him with a polite smile, but there was a coldness to it. She already knew who he was. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice perfectly pleasant. "Mr. Burke is expecting you. Please follow me." Rashawn didn't hesitate. He followed her through the marble-floored lobby, his steps echoing with every stride. The walls were lined with expensive artwork, a stark contrast to the world he and Ava had come from. This was a world of power, of influence, of control. And right now, Rashawn was about to take a stand in the heart of it. Burke's office was at the end of a long hallway, behind a heavy oak door. The receptionist knocked lightly before opening it, revealing Burke seated behind a massive desk, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Davis," Burke said with that same smooth, practiced tone. "It's good to see you again. Please have a seat." Rashawn didn't sit. He couldn't. He was too angry, too focused. Instead, he stood in the center of the room, glaring at Burke. "I'm not here to play games, Burke," Rashawn said, his voice low and firm. "I want the truth. Everything. The Whitakers, the house, the scheme you've got going. I want to know exactly what's going on." Burke didn't flinch. He only smiled, his hands folding neatly on the desk in front of him. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Davis. I've already told you everything you need to know. This house is a gift, an opportunity. Stop lying." Rashawn's voice rose, anger boiling over. This house wasn't a gift. The Whitakers didn't just give it to us. They didn't move on from it. You're playing us. This whole thing, this whole game, it's a setup. Burke's eyes narrowed, the polite smile slipping from his face. "Mr. Davis," he said, his voice no longer warm, "you don't understand the situation. You've been given something most people can only dream of. And this is how you repay us? By accusing us of deception." Rashawn stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm repaying you by calling you out. You think we're just going to sit back and let you get away with this? This isn't just about a house, Burke. This is about everything you've done. The lies, the fraud, the manipulation. You think we're stupid?" Burke stood up slowly, his calm demeanor returning. He was taller than Rashawn, but in that moment, Rashawn didn't care. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Burke said, his voice now tinged with menace. "The Whitakers are a powerful family. You're in over your head, Mr. Davis. If you keep pushing, you might just regret it." Rashawn's heart raced, but he didn't back down. "I don't care about your power. I care about my family. You've dragged us into this mess, and I'm not going to let you destroy us." Burke's expression hardened, and for the first time, Rashawn saw the anger flicker behind his eyes. "I warned you, Davis," Burke said, his voice low and threatening. "You think you're the first person to challenge the Whitakers? You're nothing but a pawn in a game you don't understand. And if you don't drop this, you'll find out just how powerful we really are." The silence between them felt like a battlefield, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Rashawn stood his ground, refusing to show fear. Burke's words were nothing more than empty threats. "You can try to intimidate me, Burke," Rashawn said, his voice steady and clear, "but it won't work. You've messed with the wrong family, and I'm not leaving until I expose you for what you are." Burke's face darkened, and he stepped closer, his posture rigid, like he was ready to strike. But Rashawn stood firm, his back straight, his chest out. He wasn't going anywhere, not until he got the answers he needed. Burke took a deep breath, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He didn't speak for a moment, but the look in his eyes said it all. "This isn't over," Burke said finally, his voice tight. "But if you think you can win this, you're mistaken. You'll regret this, Davis. I promise you that." With one last cold stare, Burke turned and walked back to his desk, dismissing Rashawn with a flick of his hand. Rashawn didn't need another invitation. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the office, his pulse pounding in his ears. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing for sure. This fight was far from over. As Rashawn walked down the hallway, his thoughts raced. Burke had tried to threaten him, but it was clear now Rashawn was right. The Whitakers had orchestrated everything. They had the power, but they couldn't scare him. Not anymore. He had the truth, and that was enough to keep fighting. The days following his confrontation with Burke were tense, filled with uncertainty and fear. Rashawn couldn't shake the weight of the encounter. Burke's threats echoed in his mind, each one laced with promises of consequences. Things that would happen if Rashawn continued to push, if he continued to dig deeper into the Whitakers' web of lies. But for the first time, Rashawn didn't feel fear. He felt anger, raw and unfiltered. He had nothing left to lose. Ava could see it in his eyes. Every time they spoke, every time they shared a quiet moment in the house, she could tell that something inside him had shifted. He was determined now, not just to protect his family, but to fight for them. The weight of everything, the eviction in the house, the manipulation, had finally broken him free from the fear that had held him captive for so long. "We can't let them get away with this, Ava," he said one night as they sat together on the couch. Their daughter had already gone to bed, leaving them with a moment of quiet to themselves, the air heavy with unspoken thoughts. Ava looked at him, her eyes tired but filled with the same resolve. "I know, but what are we going to do? They have all the power, Rashawn. They have connections, influence. They could destroy us if they wanted to." Rashawn shook his head, his voice firm. "They can't destroy us if we fight back. We can expose them. We can show everyone what they've been doing." Ava looked at him, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. She had always trusted Rashawn, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. The following day, Rashawn took the next step. He reached out to a local journalist he knew from the community, someone who had been vocal about exposing corruption in their town. A woman named Claire Matthews, a reporter with a reputation for digging deep and taking on the powerful. If anyone could help them bring the truth to light, it was her. Claire agreed to meet with Rashawn that afternoon, and he wasted no time. He knew the clock was ticking. Every day they stayed in the house was another day the Whitakers could come up with a new plan, a new way to silence them. He couldn't let them win. The coffee shop where Rashawn and Claire met was a small, quiet place on the edge of town. The air was thick with the smell of brewing coffee, and the low hum of conversation created a sense of comfort, of normalcy. Claire was already there when Rashawn arrived, her eyes scanning the room before settling on him. "Mr. Davis," she greeted him with a firm handshake. "I've been briefed on your situation. I'm glad you reached out." Rashawn took a seat across from her, his hands trembling slightly, but he kept his composure. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. I'm here to help, Claire continued, but I need the full story. What exactly happened with the Whitakers in this house? Rashawn took a deep breath, then told her everything. The eviction, the mysterious offer of the mansion, Burke's involvement, and everything it uncovered about the Whitakers. Claire listened intently, taking notes as Rashawn spoke. Every word that left his mouth seemed to lift the weight off his shoulders. The truth, finally, was being spoken aloud. When Rashawn finished, Claire paused for a moment, her pen tapping thoughtfully on her notebook. This is a huge story, Rashawn. These aren't just some isolated incidents. The Whitakers have been involved in fraudulent property dealings for years, and now they've moved on to something even bigger. This house, it's not just a giveaway. It's a scheme, part of a much larger operation. Rashawn nodded, his anger flaring. That's what I've been telling everyone. But they're powerful, Claire. They control everything. The media, the real estate market, the local authorities. How do we expose them? Claire leaned in closer, her voice low. We start with what you have. Everything. The property records, the financials, any other evidence you can find. We'll take it to the press. To the right people. It'll be hard, but once the story gets out, people will start asking questions. Rashawn's heart pounded. It was a risky move. The Whitakers had the kind of influence that could bury a story before it ever saw the light of day. But if they didn't act now, they would lose everything. If you're ready to go public with this, we'll need to prepare, Claire said. We need to make sure we have all the facts lined up and that we have the support of the community behind us. Once the media gets hold of it, there's no going back. Rashawn looked at Claire, his resolve hardening. He nodded. I'm ready. I've got nothing left to lose. That evening, as Rashawn and Ava discussed their plan, they both knew the risk they were taking. This wasn't just about exposing the Whitakers. It was about taking a stand, about saying enough was enough. They couldn't hide anymore, not in a house that was never truly theirs, not in a world that had never given them a chance. They had to fight for their dignity, for their future, for their daughter. As Rashawn stood in the living room that night, looking out the window at the mansion that had once seemed like a dream, he knew that this was a turning point. The Whitakers thought they could play God with people's lives, manipulating them with promises of wealth and comfort. But Rashawn wasn't going to let them get away with it. He wasn't going to let them destroy his family. Tomorrow, Rashawn said quietly, looking at Ava, we go public. We expose them. Ava took a deep breath, then nodded. I'm with you, Rashawn. All the way. For the first time since they had moved into the mansion, Rashawn felt a sense of control. The house, the mansion, the Whitakers, they no longer had the power to break him. They would fight back, and they would win. The day after Rashawn met with Claire felt like the calm before a storm. The decision was made, the press release was drafted, the evidence organized, and everything was set to go public. There was no turning back now. Rashawn could feel the weight of the coming battle pressing against his chest, but there was a part of him that felt something new. Hope. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like he was on the right side of history. Ava, though, wasn't so sure. Her anxiety had only deepened since Rashawn had made the call to go public with their story. She was terrified of what the Whitakers might do in retaliation. They were powerful, and Rashawn had seen the look in Burke's eyes. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. The threat of retaliation was real, but they couldn't keep hiding. The truth needed to be told, no matter the consequences. They had spent the last few hours huddled together in the kitchen, organizing their thoughts and finalizing their plan. Their daughter was playing in the corner of the living room, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their door. Rashawn looked at her, feeling both a sense of dread and determination. He was doing this for her. He was doing this for their future. Ava's voice broke the silence. Rashawn, I'm scared. What if they come after us? What if they use their influence to ruin everything? Rashawn took a deep breath and walked over to her, placing his hand on her shoulder. We're doing the right thing. You know that. We can't live in fear anymore. We've been given the chance to expose them for what they are. We owe it to ourselves and to our daughter to see this through. Ava nodded slowly, but her eyes were still clouded with uncertainty. "I know. It's just hard, Rashawn. I don't want to put her in danger." "None of this is easy," Rashawn said, his voice low. "But we have to do it. For her. For us. If we let them get away with it, we'll just be letting them win. And that's not who we are." Ava finally gave a small, resigned smile. "You're right. Let's do it. For her." The next morning, Rashawn and Ava woke early. The house was eerily quiet, the stillness of the morning amplifying the weight of the decisions they had made. Ava had made a pot of coffee, and Rashawn took a long, slow sip, staring out the window at the sprawling lawn. For the first time, he noticed how empty the mansion felt. The life that should have filled the house, the laughter, the conversation, the noise, was absent. It was a house without a soul. It was a reminder of everything they had fought for, and yet everything they had lost. Rashawn glanced at his phone. The press release was set to go live in 2 hours. The first thing they had to do was alert their neighbors. They had become close to a few of them, people who had shown kindness, but also those who had been too passive, too silent. The silence had been the most painful thing to witness. Rashawn couldn't let it continue. He picked up his phone and made the first call. "Hello, Mrs. Henson? It's Rashawn Davis. I need to speak with you." The phone calls to their neighbors were met with a mix of reactions. Some had heard rumors. Some had no idea what was happening, and others were too afraid to speak out. But one by one, Rashawn spoke with them, explaining everything about the Whitakers, about the mansion, about their fight for justice. Slowly, the walls of silence began to crack. Some neighbors promised their support, while others hesitated, unsure of what was coming. But the seed was planted. Rashawn hung up the last call and turned to Ava, who was standing by the window, her hand on the glass, her eyes lost in thought. "Everyone's on board," Rashawn said, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "It's time." Ava nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't say anything, but Rashawn could see the fear in her eyes. He understood it. He felt it too. But they couldn't stop now. He took a deep breath, his phone buzzing with the notification that the press release was live. The first tweet had already been sent. The story was out there now. There was no going back. The press conference was scheduled for later that afternoon. Rashawn and Ava sat together in the living room, watching as the story exploded across the news. Headlines flashed across the screen, some of them incredulous, others scandalous. The Whitakers were being exposed for everything they had done: fraudulent real estate deals, property manipulation, exploiting families like Rashawn's for their own gain. And as the story gained traction, more people began to come forward. The Whitakers' empire was beginning to unravel. The floodgates had opened, and the truth was out. Rashawn felt a sense of relief wash over him, but it was fleeting. As the hours passed, he kept one eye on the news and the other on the door. Every knock, every car that passed by made his heart race. What if they retaliated? What if Burke showed up, angry and armed with resources far beyond what they had? But as the day wore on, something incredible began to happen. People in the community, people Rashawn didn't even know, started to show their support. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now stood with him. A few even showed up at the house, offering help, bringing food, and sharing their stories. They, too, had been victims of the Whitakers' greed and corruption. It was clear that this fight was bigger than just Rashawn and his family. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been silenced. By evening, the Whitakers were in full damage control mode. Their legal team issued statements, tried to downplay the allegations. But it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no hiding it anymore. Rashawn sat on the couch, Ava by his side, their daughter asleep in her room. He looked out the window once again, this time with a different feeling. The mansion, once a symbol of their defeat, now felt different. It was a symbol of their resilience. They had taken a stand. They had fought back. And the Whitakers, for all their wealth and power, were no longer untouchable. The weeks that followed their public exposure of the Whitakers felt like a whirlwind. The media had covered the story extensively, with reporters digging into details of the Whitakers' shady dealings, questioning their long-held position in the community. Investigations were launched. The legal system began to take action, and for the first time in a long while, Rashawn could breathe. They had made a difference. But with the attention came a sense of unease, a lingering reminder how close they had come to losing everything. The Whitakers' empire was crumbling, but the scars it had left on Rashawn and his family were still fresh. They had exposed the truth, but the emotional cost had been high. Rashawn sat in the living room one quiet afternoon, watching as Ava played with her daughter in the backyard. The sound of laughter filled the house, a sound that had been sorely missing for far too long. His heart swelled with pride as he watched them, but it also ached. They had fought so hard to get here. So much had been lost along the way. He had always dreamed of a better life for his family, but he hadn't imagined it would come at such a steep price. The truth had set them free, but it had also exposed the darkness that lay beneath the surface of the world they lived in. The phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Claire. He had expected to hear from her, but he hadn't anticipated the flood of emotions that came with it. "Hey, Rashawn." Claire's voice came through the phone, warm but with an edge of urgency. "I've got some updates. The Whitakers are being investigated for everything you brought to light. Fraudulent dealings, illegal evictions, and more. This isn't just a small scandal anymore. It's massive." Rashawn leaned back in his chair, his heart racing. "So, they're finally being held accountable?" "There's more," Claire continued, her voice lowering. "They're facing serious legal action now. Some of their most powerful allies are already distancing themselves from the Whitakers. This is going to be bigger than we thought." Rashawn felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about the Whitakers being exposed. It was about the systemic issues they represented. The greed, the manipulation, the cruelty. And now, those issues were coming to light. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone who'd been pushed down by a system that never cared for them. "Thank you, Claire," Rashawn said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without your help." "I'm just doing my job," Claire replied, but there was a note of pride in her voice. "You did all the hard work, Rashawn. You and your family are heroes." Rashawn let out a long, slow breath. It still didn't feel real. It didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. But it was something. It was a start. Later that evening, as Rashawn and Ava sat down to dinner with their daughter, the weight of everything they had been through finally seemed to sink in. They had made it out. They had survived. And for the first time, they had a future that wasn't defined by fear and survival. Rashawn looked at Ava, his heart full of gratitude. They had been through so much, so many sleepless nights, so many times when they thought they wouldn't make it. But they had. Together. "I can't believe we made it through all that," Ava said softly, her voice filled with awe. "I thought we were done for, Rashawn. I thought this house would be our prison forever." He smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I thought so too, but we didn't let them win. And now we get to write our own story." Ava squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "I'm so proud of you, Rashawn. You stood up when no one else would. You gave us our lives back." Rashawn smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "We did it together." As they ate, Rashawn's thoughts turned to the future. He couldn't erase the pain, the trauma, the scars that the past had left, but he could build something better. They could build something better. He looked at their daughter, who was busy coloring on her plate, and his heart swelled with love. She had been the reason they fought so hard. She had been the light in the darkness, the hope that kept them going even when everything seemed hopeless. "We've come so far," Rashawn said softly, "but we're not done yet. There's still work to be done. Ava, we can't stop here." Ava nodded, understanding what he meant. They couldn't rest on their laurels. Not yet. The fight wasn't over. There were still so many people out there who needed help, who needed a voice just like they had. "We'll keep fighting," Ava said, her voice firm. "For her. For everyone." Rashawn smiled. For everyone. The next morning, Rashawn and Ava made their way to the community center, where they had been invited to speak about their experience. The room was filled with people, families who had been through similar struggles, people who had felt forgotten, silenced by the system. As Rashawn and Ava took the stage, the room fell silent. Rashawn cleared his throat, his nerves suddenly getting the best of him. But when he looked out at the faces in the crowd, faces filled with hope and strength. He knew what he had to say. "We're not here because we're special," Rashawn began, his voice strong and steady. "We're here because we've all been to the same fight. We've all been pushed down, ignored, and hurt, but we're still here, and we're going to keep standing. Together." Ava stood by his side, her hand in his. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We won't stop until everyone has a voice, until everyone can live with dignity." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound ringing in Rashawn's ears. This was their legacy, what they would leave behind. The fight for justice wasn't over, but they had started something. They had sparked a fire, and that fire would continue to burn